Florida mornings have a certain softness to them, even in November. Down in Deerfield Beach, the light doesn't break sharply like it does up north. It spills. It warms. It arrives slowly, like someone pulling back a curtain by hand. On this particular morning in 2004, the neighborhood is already awake. Sprinklers arc over small lawns. Palms rustle in the breeze coming in from the coast. A few cars make their way down the street, unhurried, heading toward work, groceries, school drop-offs, life's everyday routines. Inside her home, Jannette Mizener is beginning her day in that very same quiet rhythm. She moves through her kitchen with a familiarity that suggests years of habit. The coffee maker hums. The radio plays a local station, the signal drifting in and out, the way radios in Florida often do when humidity hangs thick in the air. There is a calmness here. Not loneliness, just independence. A life that unfolds at its own pace. Her home is tidy but lived in. The sort of place where the furniture isn't chosen to impress anyone, but because it feels right, because it holds memory and comfort. A framed photograph on a shelf. A stack of envelopes to go through later. A soft throw blanket draped on the couch. This is a life shaped not by extravagance but by self-sufficiency. By resilience. By quiet strength. And yet, woven into this ordinary morning is something else. Something invisible. Something that no one, not even Jannette herself, can sense. The stillness is too still. The house feels too quiet. There are moments in life where the world appears unchanged while fate is already moving. A moment where everything looks ordinary, but the story is already bending toward tragedy. This morning is one of those moments. Because sometime after this quiet routine, after coffee, after sunrise, after whatever small task she moved through, Jannette is gone. Her life is interrupted. Her home no longer a home but a scene. A place marked by violence, absence, and unanswered questions. What remains afterward is a silence that lasts years. And a mystery that has never fully released its hold. The first signs aren't dramatic. No alarms. No frantic calls. Just an absence. Someone who expects to hear from Jannette, doesn't. A phone call goes unanswered. Then another. Texting wasn't yet what it is today. Voicemail was still the language of missed connections. And voicemail after voicemail goes unreturned. Days pass, just enough to create discomfort. Enough to turn, "I'm sure she's just busy," into, "something isn't right." It's a family member who first decides to check in. That instinct, the kind that comes not from panic but from familiarity. A quiet knowing. They arrive at the house. It looks the same as always. The small front walkway. The windows partly shaded. Nothing appears disturbed. They knock. No answer. They knock again, louder now. A little longer than usual. Listening for footsteps, a voice, anything. Silence. A kind of silence that feels wrong. Thick. Motionless. Concern shifts into unease. And unease into dread. The Broward Sheriff's Office is contacted for a welfare check. Deputies arrive. They knock again. They call out her name. They try the door. What happens next is quiet, procedural, but heavy. They step inside. There is no sign of a break-in. No overturned furniture. No shattered lamps or broken glass. Nothing dramatic. But there, in the stillness of her own home, they find Jannette. She has been stabbed to death. Not in the chaos of a public space, not in a confrontation outside, but in what should have been the safest place a person has, her home. The scene is not wild, not frenzied, not impulsive looking. It is intentional, direct, personal. The knife is gone. The killer is gone. And the quiet remains. The home becomes a crime scene. Yellow tape, gloves, cameras. Each step inside documented. Every object, surface, angle recorded. Neighbors gather outside, hushed voices, shaken looks. Because when violence happens in a quiet neighborhood, it does not just affect one home. It unsettles the entire world around it. Investigators begin where they always begin. What happened? When did it happen? Who had access to the home? Who had reason to harm her? But the scene gives them very few answers. No forced entry. Which means, she let the person in. Or they already had a way in. Or she didn't feel afraid of them. No theft. Nothing obvious is missing. This was not a robbery gone wrong. No witness reports. No neighbors hearing shouting. No strange vehicles reported. The timeline is reconstructed by last known phone call, last confirmed statement from someone who saw her, mail delivery patterns, environmental conditions inside the home. But without surveillance, and in 2004 residential security cameras were rare, there is no visual trail. No immediate suspect emerges. And yet, detectives know something important. This crime was up close. It required proximity. It required being near enough to touch, near enough to harm. Which means, the killer likely knew Jannette, or was familiar enough to be trusted. That alone narrows the field. But it does not name the person. And so, the investigation moves on, slowly, carefully. Decisions made inch by inch. But time is already beginning to work against them. Because the longer a killer remains unidentified, the quieter the trail becomes. To understand a case like this, we have to slow down and look not at the crime but at the person. Because a life is not defined by the way it ended. A life is defined by how it was lived. Jannette Mizener was 42 years old at the time of her death. She lived in a quiet residential neighborhood in Deerfield Beach, a community where homes sit low to the ground, where the ocean is never far, and where most days pass without major excitement or disruption. She lived alone, not as isolation but as independence. There is an entire world of difference between those two things. Jannette's independence came from experience. From the sort of adulthood where you learn to handle things yourself, because you've had to. Not every life story comes with smooth paths and easy choices. Some lives are shaped by resilience. She was known to be private, in the way that comes from valuing your inner world. Capable, someone who managed her own affairs. Steady, predictable in routine, grounded in habits. Gentle but not naive. Quiet but not silent. She wasn't someone who demanded attention. She wasn't someone who needed noise around her. She lived in a way that made sense to her, and that is a deeply respectable thing. Her home reflected that. Not spotless but comfortable. Not decorated for show, but for familiarity. A home built on layers of small rituals. The same morning coffee. The same evening wind-down routine. The same quiet pace of everyday living. Routine is something most of us underestimate. It is the fabric that holds life steady. And when that routine is broken, violently, the absence is profound. Because Jannette's life was not marked by chaos. Not by dramatic conflict. Not by behavior that would lead most people to think danger was close. She was simply living. And that is perhaps what makes her case so emotionally piercing. Because violence did not arrive into an environment of turmoil. It arrived into an environment of calm, into familiarity, into normalcy, into the place where she should have been safest. When violence enters a life like Jannette's, it rarely comes from randomness. Violent crime has patterns. Not always obvious, not always loud, but present. To understand the person responsible, we step back and look not at the act itself first, but the mindset capable of carrying it out. The person who did this entered a home where peace was the baseline, where routine shaped the day, where nothing chaotic was erupting. To violate that space, to introduce violence into it, is not a spontaneous impulse. It is intentional. This was someone who felt comfortable enough to approach the home, believed they could leave unseen, was not afraid to be physically close, possessed confidence or familiarity or entitlement. Crimes like this, personal, direct, and invasive, are rarely about property. They are about control. Not control in the loud, explosive way of an argument escalating. Control in the quiet way. The kind that lives inside someone who believes. Their wants outrank others' safety. Their impulses require no permission. Their presence matters more than someone else's life. That kind of mindset does not appear out of nowhere. It is practiced. Rehearsed across years of smaller harm. Disregard for boundaries. Disregard for consent. Disregard for the emotional reality of others. This is not a crime of passion. It is not heat-of-the-moment chaos. This is a crime committed by someone who could silence empathy long enough to act with purpose. And that is a very specific psychological profile. The person who did this likely appeared ordinary to the world, knew how to blend, knew how to move through daily life without drawing suspicion. Most violent offenders are not monsters in appearance. They are unremarkable, familiar, comfortable in society. They know how to be invisible in plain sight. And that is perhaps the most unsettling truth in all of this. It is not that someone dangerous entered her world. It is that someone dangerous was already in the world, walking among others, going to work, standing in line at the grocery store, living like everyone else. Violence does not always look like violence from the outside. Sometimes it looks like normalcy with something missing behind the eyes. A quiet void where empathy should be. And once you understand that, the story stops being just about what happened. It becomes about who was capable of it, and who walked away. To reconstruct what happened, investigators look for pattern, opportunity, and behavioral logic. Not speculation, but probability. The entry into the home shows no early signs of forced break. This suggests the door may have been opened voluntarily, or the killer had a way in, or there was a moment of vulnerability, unlocked entry, routine oversight, a window, or familiarity. This matters, because how someone enters a home tells us what they believe they were entitled to. There were no reports of significant rummaging. This means the killer was not searching. The killer was not looking for objects. The killer's focus was Jannette, not her belongings. This was not theft. This was contact. There is no evidence of extended struggle. No prolonged resistance, which often means surprise. Immediate overpowering. The killer was either physically stronger or moving with determination, not hesitation. Homicide through direct, physical means is intimate. It requires proximity, a closeness that forces the killer to see the person they are harming. This is not distance-based violence. This is deliberate, personal harm. Someone who commits that kind of violence is not acting on accident. They are acting from a mindset where the victim's humanity has already been erased in their mind. No frantic escape. No chaotic destruction. No panic left behind. Which is perhaps the darkest detail of all. The killer left calmly, composed, controlled, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Because for them, it wasn't extraordinary. It was the fulfillment of something already present inside them. But with each passing week, the pace slows. Not because the case matters less, but because leads stop appearing. There is no witness stepping forward. No confession. No neighbor remembering something late. No physical evidence that immediately unlocks an answer. And so, slowly, the case begins to cool. Months pass, then years, and life moves around the absence the way water moves around a stone. For the family, time becomes strange. It doesn't move forward, it expands outward. It stays. The grief remains fresh because the story has no ending. When a case is solved, closure does not erase grief, but it gives it shape. It gives it boundaries, a place to rest. When a case remains open, grief stays uncontained. It can flare up at any moment. A smell, a date, a song, any small reminder. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office does what law enforcement often does in unresolved cases. They pause, but they do not forget. The file is not discarded. It is stored, reviewed occasionally, revisited when staffing, technology, or pressure allows. Cold cases are like embers. They don't burn openly, but given the right conditions they can reignite. And in Broward County, law enforcement periodically reignites public awareness. News reminders, reissued bulletins, Crime Stoppers notices, requests for tips. These aren't empty gestures. They are signals. Signals that someone somewhere might still speak. Or science might eventually do the speaking. Because the story is not finished simply because time has passed. Time does not solve mysteries. People do. Science does. Conscience does. And conscience can wake at any time. In the early 2000s, DNA evidence existed, but it was limited. To create a usable profile, investigators needed a substantial amount of biological material, a clean sample, a database match. These aren't empty gestures. They are signals. Signals that someone somewhere might still speak. Or science might eventually do the speaking. Because the story is not finished simply because time has passed. Time does not solve mysteries. People do. Science does. Conscience does. And conscience can wake at any time. In the early 2000s, DNA evidence existed, but it was limited. To create a usable profile, investigators needed a substantial amount of biological material, a clean sample, a database match. If the suspect had never been arrested for a qualifying offense, their DNA would not be in the system. Meaning, if the killer was not already known to law enforcement, the DNA might as well have been invisible. But time changes science, and science changes cases. In the years since Janette's murder, touch DNA became viable. Very small trace samples can now be amplified. Genetic genealogy can identify suspects through relatives. Cold cases once thought hopeless are now being solved at a historic rate. The Broward Sheriff's Office has not disclosed whether usable DNA exists in this case. But the fact that the case remains publicly active is telling. Law enforcement does not reissue appeals for cases they consider unsolvable. They do so when the case has preserved evidence, and there is belief that either technology or human memory could still unlock the truth. In this era, cases like this one can change in a single phone call, a single lab report, a single person finally deciding to speak. This case waits in that kind of threshold. Not closed, not forgotten, suspended but not still. A life interrupted not because it was reckless, but because someone else carried something dark enough to take it away. That is what lingers. That is what the family has to live with. Not only the grief of loss, but the absence of explanation. And that is its own kind of torment. The early days of any homicide investigation are dense. Interviews, evidence logs, timelines, contact lists, detectives working case notes deep into the night. And they walked back into their life, into their routines, into a world that did not know what they had done. In the days that followed, the neighborhood didn't speak in full sentences. It spoke in fragments. Did you hear? They found her. I can't believe. But who would? People lowered their voices when they said her name, not out of disrespect but because grief often makes us whisper. It was as if the air around the home had changed density. Heavier, thicker, harder to move through. Friends came to the house with casseroles and flowers and trembling hands, because sometimes food is the only language people have when the world stops making sense. Family members tried to understand a sequence of actions that should not exist. She was alive. She was home. She should still be here. That is the hardest part of violent loss. The ordinary continues. Mail still arrives. Clocks still move. The sun does not dim. And the world refuses to reflect the devastation inside the people left behind. There's no arrest, no confession, no single face to direct grief toward. So the grief turns inward. It becomes restless, circular, endless. Because when there is no answer, the mind doesn't stop looking for one. It reruns the last phone call, the last visit, the last moment that still felt normal. It searches for signs that weren't visible then, but now glow in memory with unbearable brightness. And nights become the hardest. Because there's something about the dark that makes unanswered questions louder. This is the part people don't talk about. Cold cases don't freeze pain. They preserve it. Perfectly. Like a room sealed behind a door no one can open. And every year, the Broward Sheriff's Office puts out another notice. Another reminder. Another call for answers. The world reads it and scrolls past. But the family reads it and breaks again. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing the truth is still out there, inside someone. Someone is living with this. Someone wakes up every morning with memory in their hands. They carry it quietly, the way one carries a sharp object wrapped in cloth. Hidden, but always there. Maybe they tell themselves it was justified. Maybe they tell themselves it was an accident. Maybe they have buried it so deeply that it only surfaces in dreams, in the moments between waking and awareness. But silence is not innocence. And time is not forgiveness. The silence surrounding this case is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of something unfinished. something unresolved, something that still breathes. Jannette's story does not end with closure. It ends with a door half open, darkness behind it, waiting. Someone knows what happened. Someone remembers. And it only takes one fracture in silence for truth to pour out. So if you know something, even something small, even something you convinced yourself didn't matter, break the silence. Because the silence in this story is not empty. It is full. Full of weight. Full of memory. Full of a life that should still be here. And until the truth is spoken, the silence belongs to the one who keeps it.